I made this myself, can you tell? I'm scared. Welcome to Chiller Thriller, also known as Horror for Scared People. My name is Riley, and I am here to guide you through horror movies if you find yourself interested in them, but not quite confident to tackle one on your own. Think of this as your scaredy cat companion guide. Today, we are going to be talking about my favorite movie to come out in 2019, and that is Ari Aster's Midsommar. I was already a massive fan of his based on his work in 2018's Hereditary, and I feel like ever since then I've been trying to find the feeling that I felt when I saw that movie in a theater for the first time, and now I'm just chasing the high of Midsommar. Ari Aster has really cornered the market on grief horror, and I think he's really smart about it. Grief is just such a messy, complicated, awful experience, and to analyze that through the lens of a horror movie is something I really love. An overall blanket warning before we go on, this is by far the most intense and disturbing movie I've covered on this channel so far, so if you have any concerns at all, please check the description box below. Now, we all know how I feel about jump scares, and just one of the many things that I love about this movie is the fact that there are only 3 jump scares in the entire movie. 3 jump scares in a movie that's over 2.5 hours long. Let's roll them here. So, if jump scares are all you're worried about, I'd say you're good to go and enjoy Midsommar. However, if you are nervous about any specific triggering content or upsetting things, and there is a lot of it, I'll be rolling those timestamps now, and just stick around because we're gonna dive deep into all that happens in just a minute.
I don't wanna be a rodeo. She'll lasso me up, and off we go. And I fell in love with Annalise. She is the only girl who's ever been nice to me. She is my own little personal goat. She'll pick me up and drive.
Welcome to Spoiler Town! I read that at a premiere screening of this movie, Ari Aster got up on stage to introduce the film, and he said, "I wrote this movie when I was going through a breakup. I'm better now." And I think that this movie is the ultimate breakup movie, and so much more. Everything in it is visually and viscerally stunning, and we start off with a bang. While normally in these videos I'm able to point out specific moments where something really hard to watch is coming up and you should close your eyes or look away, but this movie is really different in a lot of ways. Pretty much the entire opening scene is nothing short of horrifying, so we are going to tread very lightly as we dive in. We meet our girl Danny, played by Academy Award nominee Florence Pugh. I'm sorry, I'm just so glad we get to call her that. She is feeling concerned after getting some worrying messages from her sister who has bipolar. She reaches out for advice from her boyfriend Christian, who is played by Jack Rayner, who I know and love from the movie Sing Street, which is something that will never be covered on this channel, but I highly recommend it anyway. We quickly learn that this is not a happy relationship. Danny is stressed out that she's going to overwhelm Christian with all of her family issues, and we learn through a conversation with Christian's friends that he has wanted out of this relationship for over a year now. Even at the onset of this movie, Danny and Christian's relationship is so painful and incredibly realistic, which heightens the events of the film so well. As upsetting as an unhappy relationship is, we still have to get to this movie's horribly traumatic inciting incident. Danny calls Christian again, however this time when he picks up the phone, all he hears is Danny screaming on the other line.
Danny. Babe.
It is haunting and fills the viewer with so much dread as your mind starts to reel trying to figure out what could have possibly happened. It is revealed to us that Danny's sister had attached some tubing to the exhaust pipe of her car, and she has fed that tubing through their house and into their parents' room, killing them in their sleep. Additionally, she has also attached another tube to her own face, killing herself as well. It is beyond disturbing and incredibly shocking, but so well executed by Ari Aster. The lead up to the reveal is genius as it slowly dawns on you what you are looking at rather than just explaining it to you right away, and I have never seen anything like it. To kick off a movie with something so out of left field is incredibly bold, and as horrifying as it is, it also instills a sort of excitement as you wonder where they could possibly go next. We cut back to Christian comforting Danny as Florence Pugh cries in a way I have never heard a person cry before. And that's our opening scene. We catch up with our characters 6 months later on a blinding summer day, and Danny is understandably still going through it. She gets herself out of bed to go to a party with Christian that he clearly doesn't want her to go to.
But you just keep sleeping.
Oh. No, I'll come with you.
Sure you've had enough sleep?
At the party, we learn that Christian, along with his friends from before, Josh, Mark, and Pelle, are all planning a trip to Sweden to visit Pelle's village and participate in their Midsommar festival. This is the first Danny had heard about this trip, and when she tries to ask Christian why he would hide this from her, it devolves into a fight in which she ends up apologizing to him, which I think is crazy. When talking about this movie, it is really easy to shit on Christian, and I will be shitting on Christian a great deal, but I do think it is also important to recognize that he is suffering in this relationship as well. For many reasons, it is way easier to see Danny's side than his, but they are both valid. Essentially, he is a really bad boyfriend in a really bad situation. I digress. We meet back up with the boys, and Christian informs everybody that he has invited Danny on the trip, but there's no way she'll actually come.
I invited her, and she accepted, but she's not actually coming to Sweden.
Actually, there is a way she'll come because you invited her to come and she said she wants to, you buffoon. Out of all the characters, Pelle seems the most inviting to Danny, telling her how excited he is for her to come and how sorry he is for the loss of her family. The talk about her family freaks Danny out, and she excuses herself to go cry in the bathroom of the airplane. Hell yeah, transition! This is such a smart way of cutting out all the boring stuff like getting to the airport and moving right on to the action. I love it! We land in Sweden, and I feel the need to point out that it will not be nighttime outside for the remainder of this movie. This is a blindingly bright daytime horror film, and there's nothing better. Right away, we are met with pure disorientation. The sound is all blown out, the screen is really bright, and things are being shot upside down. It just sets the tone and the vibe so effectively. We arrive in Hälsingland, where everyone is really lit up about this party. We meet Pelle's communal family as well as an English couple, Simon and Connie, who are also invited to participate in the festival. They are ready to rock and roll and immediately offer the group some hallucinogens, but Danny doesn't really think that's the best idea for her right now. After her refusal makes Christian and Mark all weird and awkward, she does it anyway. Classic peer pressure. Things actually stop being tragic for a moment, and we get a couple of jokes in, reminding me that this movie is really funny too.
I'm just gonna lay down, okay?
Yeah, do that.
Everybody else lay down.
You really can have it all. Danny was correct, and she has a bad trip because of course she does. She's traumatized and surrounded by people who don't like her. This bad trip includes grass growing out of her hand, groups of people laughing at her, and her dead sister appearing in the bathroom mirror behind her, leading to the second of this movie's 3 jump scares. At this point, it's somewhere around 9 p.m., but the sun is still blazing bright in the sky in another way that this movie disorients us. After waking up from one hell of a nap, the group traverses further into the commune towards the center of the festival. For the next good while, things aren't outright horrifying or scary, but we're just majorly unsettled by everything that's going on. There are so many interesting things to look at, like this bear in a cage, or this series of tapestries seeming to tell the story of a woman mixing her menstrual blood in a beverage and her pubic hair into a pie in order to make a man fall in love with her and have a baby with her. Now, if you have a feeling they wouldn't show us those things if they weren't going to come back later, you'd be correct. But for now, our characters are just getting settled in their beautiful sleeping arrangements. Christian produces this pathetic piece of cake after Pelle reminds him that it is Danny's birthday.
Happy birthday to you.
I cut him a little slack because the consistent daylight makes it really hard to determine what day it is, but still, Pelle seems to be the only one of them who's even thinking about it being her birthday.
Happy birthday.
Christian's friend Josh hasn't come to Sweden purely for pleasure, as he's also there to work on his thesis, which is an anthropological study of such midsummer festivities. Because of his research, Josh has some knowledge of the festival already, and he seems really surprised when Pele tells them that tomorrow the commune will be engaging as a ritual known as Atestupa, but he won't tell the rest of them what that means.
Is it scary?
Well, we're about to see for ourselves as the next day, everyone gathers for a formal meal before relocating to the side of this cliff. If you are at all sensitive to gore, I don't know that there is any way to safely watch this scene, so please check the timestamps in the description below and take care of yourselves. All that being said, I can't overstate how visually remarkable this is. The scene is so blindingly bright that it hurt to look at while I was in the movie theater, and that feeling has stuck with me more than anything when I look back on this movie. As the ritual continues, 2 elders of the commune stand at the top of the cliff as everyone watches from below. We see Danny gasp in horror, and then we see the elderly woman jump off of the cliff, smashing her face on a rock below. It is brutal, and we see it all. The outsiders to the commune are freaking out, and before they have a chance to recover, we also see the elderly man jump off the cliff as well. Unfortunately, the fall doesn't kill him immediately, so members of the commune take turns smashing his face in with this mallet until he dies. It is shocking, to say the least. Just ask Christian.
That was really, really shocking.
It's incredibly unflinching as we see the mallet connect with his face over and over without cutting away, and Ari Aster is never a director to shy away from realistic gore. Even knowing what was coming, this scene is still pretty intense to watch. Members of the commune try explaining that this is a normal thing for them and it's not anything scary or disturbing, but despite their best efforts, Connie and Simon have decided that they're gonna leave. Josh and Christian are willing to stay for the sake of Josh's thesis, and Mark is fine because he napped through the ritual anyway. Speaking of Josh's thesis, Christian has taken a sudden interest in it because after the shocking events of what they just witnessed, he's decided he wants to write his thesis on this community as well.
Fuck you.
No, do not fuck me. Find your own subject.
As I've said, I do really try to sympathize with Christian, but then he goes and does shit like this.
I'm gonna do my thesis here. If you're gonna do it here too, I'm open to collaborating.
Not only is he a shitty boyfriend, he's a shitty friend too. Get your own thesis! Who would have thought I would care this much about a man's thesis in a horror movie? Danny is packing her things to leave, but Pele comes in and tries to convince her to stay. He changes the topic by talking to her about the trauma from the loss of her family and her problems in her relationship with Christian.
Danny, do you feel held by him? Does he feel like home to you?
It gets a little intimate, and it's hard not to swoon over this soft Swedish boy, and that seems to be enough to convince Danny to stay. That night, Danny has a nightmare where Christian and all the other boys sneak off without her, leaving her there, and it's a really visceral fear. Also in this nightmare, we see flashes of every disgusting thing that's happened in this movie so far, and it's a lot. The next morning, while they're all hanging out, Mark walks up to them and says that he has to go take a leak, and I do not know what possesses him to do this, but he decides to walk all the way over here and go pee on this dead tree. People are not happy about this, screaming at Mark in Swedish that he has just peed on the sacred ancestral tree. Something tells me that Mark's presence is no longer welcome at this festival, but honestly, who pees on a tree? This is the moment where I really feel like a switch flips and everyone's just unraveling and there's no going back. Connie has all of her stuff packed and she's ready to go, only she can't find Simon. An elder of the commune gives her a very convoluted and suspicious story explaining why they had to take Simon to the station first and that they'll drive back to get her and bring her there after.
You will meet him there.
Connie finds it beyond strange that Simon would leave without saying anything to her, and she's correct. It's very strange. Connie decides to leave on her own and storms off in a huff. Now this is the last we see of her in this movie, but we do hear a woman screaming in the distance later, so I think it's safe to say whatever they do to her, it's not good. It's time for another group meal, and something that immediately catches my eye is the fact that Christian's drink is significantly darker than everyone else's at the table. This couldn't have anything to do with those tapestries we saw earlier, could it? Nah. Christian bites into his meat pie and then pulls a short curly hair out of his mouth, leaving no room for mistaking what is actually going on here.
Is that a fucking pube?
Ew.
It's just a hair. Yeah, a pubic hair.
Funnily enough, I think this was the moment in the movie that got the most vocal reaction out of the audience that I saw it with. A guy in the row in front of me punched his fist in the air in excitement. It was thrilling. So we've got Christian eating pubes and drinking blood while this redheaded girl makes eyes at him, and then Mark is swept away by another beautiful Swedish girl. That night, Josh sneaks into a hut to take pictures of the commune's sacred texts, even though he was explicitly told not to.
Photographs? No, absolutely not. Okay.
He's interrupted by who he thinks is Mark, but something is pretty obviously wrong with him. He isn't speaking and he's pantsless, which is enough of a distraction for Josh for someone to sneak up behind him and smash him in the head with a mallet. He is down for the count, and the pantsless man is revealed to be someone wearing Mark's skin as a mask. They're dropping like flies. The next day is a big day, as it is time to crown the May Queen. Danny is worried about Mark and Josh's whereabouts, but Christian only seems concerned with not getting in trouble with members of the commune and losing sources for his thesis.
And if he did take that book, I just pray you understand we don't associate as friends of his or collaborators or anything.
Once again, he makes it really hard to feel bad for him. Christian gets called into a private meeting with an elder, and Danny goes off with the rest of the women to prepare for the maypole dance competition. She drinks a special tea, and that's when we know we're gonna get really trippy for the rest of this film. Meanwhile, Christian is informed that he has been approved to mate with Maya, you know, that girl who baked her pubes into a pie for him. He is much less resistant to this idea than you would hope he'd be, and it is troubling. The maypole dance competition commences, and Danny is like really good at it for someone who just got there and doesn't speak the language. The dance goes on, even as women begin to vomit and collapse from exhaustion. Christian arrives to observe the competition, and he also drinks some of the special tea. Women continue to drop out until Danny is left the last one standing. It is really exhausting to watch, and it just looks so hot and sweaty and miserable. Everyone is thrilled when Danny wins in a way that feels almost ominous. She is crowned the May Queen and is sat at the head of the table for the ceremonial meal. It makes complete sense to me that Danny would be really susceptible to being sucked into the allure of this commune, because her whole family's dead and I'm sure she's really looking for that sense of love and belonging. However, this is unlike any family dinner I've had, and I've had some wild family dinners. If I thought they looked hot before, I cannot imagine how hot it must have been sitting at that reflective table with the sun beating down on it. I would call this a pretty stressful meal. Everybody is sweating and drugged out of their minds, but it also contains one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
What's going on?
He just looks so wounded, and it's just so absurd. At this point, everything is just weird. Flowers are breathing, trees are pulsing, things are vibrating. It makes you feel sick almost. It's like you're seeing things that you aren't supposed to see. I definitely didn't catch this on my own, but someone on Twitter pointed out that you can see Danny's sister's face with the tube sticking out of her mouth in this shot. Man, it's just crazy. Danny is whisked away to bless the crops or something, and Christian is whisked away to impregnate Maya. It is simply nuts, and I don't know how I'm gonna be able to show anything from this scene without getting banned from YouTube forever, so bear with me. He enters the room to find Maya also completely naked, spread out on this foliage, surrounded by several other women who are completely naked. He begins his process, and now the women are also chanting and singing, and one of them is pushing on his butt to assist, I assume? It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. While all this is happening, Danny returns and goes against the advice she is given to not investigate the source of the moaning and chanting she is hearing. She peeks through the keyhole and sees what we have all been seeing for the past 5 minutes, and this is it for her. She promptly vomits and runs back to the room where they all sleep in, followed by the group of women she was with. Danny is inconsolable, and the group of women all join in on her anguish. Now, you know I love a good group cry, but this one just does not give me that warm, fuzzy feeling I'm looking for. I just feel bad. It gets really hard at this point to warn you about upsetting things that are happening because there's just so much happening all the time. Christian finishes his business and runs outside completely nude, displaying one hell of a farmer's tan. He runs and finds this leg sticking out of the ground, which Wikipedia tells me belongs to Josh. He seeks refuge inside of a barn, but instead of finding safety, he finds Simon's body splayed out and cut open and hung across the ceiling with flowers in his eye sockets. They really linger on this shot of his body, and I think they're showing that his lungs are still breathing, which might mean he's still alive, in which case, woof. Christian is then drugged, paralyzed, and knocked unconscious. When he wakes up, it seems like this woman is trying to make him feel better, but she's doing a really bad job of it.
You can't speak. You can't move. All right?
I love these moments where you know something absolutely fucked up is going on, but you have no idea what yet. He's still paralyzed, and we see Danny sitting on her May Queen throne in this incredible flower dress. We learned that as part of the festival, there needs to be 9 human sacrifices made. 4 outsiders, Simon, Connie, Mark, and Josh, 2 elderly sacrifices, 2 volunteers, and the final victim is chosen by the May Queen. She is asked to decide between Christian and this guy picked at random, and of course she chooses to sacrifice Christian after what she just saw over some rando. Pele seems very pleased with himself that he was able to bring in so many sacrifices, and curse his gentle ways for tricking me into thinking he was a good guy. In preparing for the sacrifice, the already dead bodies are arranged inside of this yellow hut that we've been seeing from time to time throughout the movie. To prepare Christian, we see commune members disemboweling this bear that we saw 1,000,000 years ago when they first arrived. They slide Christian's body up into the carcass of the bear and place him inside the hut for sacrifice, creating an instantly iconic image from this movie. Speaking of instantly iconic images, Danny watches in disgust and horror as the hut burns in front of her, while all the commune members celebrate around her. At least I think that's what they're doing. Eventually, her expression changes into a satisfied smile as we fade out and the credits roll. And that's Midsommar. There is so much to be said about this movie. I think my final thoughts can best be wrapped up by the last note I took while rewatching. I do stand by the fact, however, that this is the ultimate breakup movie. Now, I certainly don't want to burn my ex alive in the carcass of a bear, and I certainly don't think Ari Aster wants to do that either, but I think anyone who has been through a horrible breakup can understand the sentiment. Ari Aster's movies, 2 for 2, have blown me away and continuously changed the way that I look at movies altogether, and I'm so excited to see what comes next from him. I hope you enjoyed embarking on this psychedelic, horrific exploration of grief with me, and until next time, remember, there's nothing to be scared of. Atestupa. And it's Atestupa. I sound dumb. Really shocking. I gotta go.